With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hey y'all, my name is Maréshah Malcom. Today I have a special guest co-hosting with me, my dad, Reverend Michael Malcom. Organizing can be a way to mobilize our communities to get involved, have their voices heard, and speak about all the injustices that they're facing. In many ways, we all have unified fighting for our rights, our well-being, and our planet. Communities all over the South and around the world are activating against their own specific struggles, and one of those is the Mountain Valley Pipeline in Appalachia. Today, we're here with Russell Chisholm with POWHR to learn more about the fight happening in Virginia and West Virginia.
Climate justice, y'all. It's real. It's here. It's about time we listen to folks like Russell Chisholm. All right, let's get started with the show. Oh, yeah.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
This is Climate Justice, Y'all, a podcast dedicated to lifting up and centering the climate and environmental justice movement in the South. Despite the South being the most biodiverse, diverse, and one of the largest economic engines in the world, we are underfunded and often barred from the decision-making table. Because of that, we decided to pull up a chair and amplify the stories of communities in the South that are hit the hardest by the climate crisis.
We're using good old-fashioned storytelling to shine a spotlight on these Southern leaders from all walks of life, putting in their blood, sweat, and tears to transform the region. The usage of y'all in the title is on purpose. We are honoring our Southern heritage of creativity, resilience, and ingenuity. Climate justice, y'all. It's real, it's here, and it's about time y'all hear what we have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, for joining us. I'm going to have you start us off with just introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're coming from, who you representing.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Russell Chisholm. My pronouns are he, him. I am calling in today from Monacan and Tutelo Stolen Land in Southwest Virginia, a little town where I've had the pleasure of living for over 20 years now. In Newport, which is in Giles County, down here in Southwest Virginia. We're a directly impacted community along the Mountain Valley Pipeline project.
Thank you for that, Mr. Russell. And by the way, it's good to speak with you today. Today we're talking about community organizing. Speaking of the Stop MVP pipeline, how did you get involved in your work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It won't probably come as any surprise to you, Reverend. The word started spreading mostly through the community here by way of telephone, landlines, and neighbors talking to each other at public events and particularly in the churches here in Newport. But all up and down the route, I think that was pretty much the same. It was kind of neighbor to neighbor communication. People started getting wind of this massive fracked gas pipeline project coming through the region. It sounded like a terrible idea, especially for folks who live here, who rely on groundwater, private wells and springs, and water sources that we've all tried to be good stewards of here in the community. And the more we learned about it, the more the community anxiety level grew until it grew to that point of organizing and taking action. So answered that call, from the community and started attending meetings. And I think that was back in late 2014, early 2015, and we're still at it.
So, Mr. Russell, we're saying like Stop MVP and Mountain Valley Pipeline, but I'm sure we have some listeners who may not know what that is. Can you just share an overview of what Mountain Valley Pipeline is and how it affects water and your community?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Folks still are learning about this project. it has been in the spotlight lately, but there is a lot to understand about it. MVP is a 303-mile, 42-inch diameter, high-pressure methane delivery pipeline. It originates in Mobley up in Wetzel County, West Virginia, and terminates in the southern part of Virginia down in the Chatham area in Pittsylvania County. It requires three massive compressor stations to move that gas across these mountains and steep slopes to that endpoint down in Southern Virginia. And there have been rumors all throughout that eventually they would require and potentially ask for another compressor station somewhere along the route. The route that they've picked goes through mostly rural areas, goes through a lot of low-income communities, directly impacts elderly residents, people who don't have a lot of money to kind of fight back through the eminent domain courts, and really kind of exposes the long history of citing massive fossil fuel projects as being placed on the backs of the most vulnerable people. So it's an environmental justice issue. It's a climate issue because it's methane. And we're starting to understand more and more about the methane contributions to global heating through, the escaped gases, through burning of that fuel, and creating, more and more greenhouse gas emissions and just compounding the problem that we're all living with right now.
Russell, I came over to West Virginia with Arm in Arm. Used to be the U.S. Climate Action Network, and we came and we did an action with you all around Stop Mountain Valley Pipeline. And one of the things that I continued to hear from community members was that there was this huge lack of resources. What was surprising, in all honesty, was that these were poor, rural white folk who were having the same complaints of abandonment that happens in our communities as well. And so let me ask you, because you all are not just doing just Mountain Valley Pipeline, but this is a larger issue of pipelines, period, and the expansion of fossil fuel via pipeline. So how do you all organize around the Mountain Valley Pipeline? And more broadly, how do you all organize around just stopping fossil fuel expansion? And given the limited resources as well, how are you all going about communicating with your local communities and getting them involved?
Yeah. Also over these last several years, all of our communities have been contending with the ongoing pandemic too, right? So that's made it more difficult to organize in person. And as we talked about, it's a long linear project. So over 300 miles, it can be really hard to gather together in large groups and kind of give people action items and tools to take home with them to go back and organize in their communities. So most of it has been held together, through email and through phone calls, regular conference calls that we have, where, new folks who are just learning about the project, whether they work for an organization or they're just grassroots organizing in their community, are invited to join. And lately we've been trying to do more outreach and sort of community upbuilding and uplifting events, just because it's so hard to sustain a long campaign that sometimes you just need to gather and share a meal and share some songs and prayers and whatever it is that moves people to come out and meet some of those folks that, have been holding it down all that time. So I think that's a key part of what you're describing there. And that's true across frontline communities, that it's out of sight, out of mind for so many people, right? So people kind of feel forgotten about. They feel like their needs and concerns are not a top priority for decision makers, certainly not for these regulatory agencies, who approve project after project after project in our most vulnerable communities. And so sometimes just helping people feel seen, feel in community, and really sort of rally around each other is absolutely one of those things that keeps sustaining us. And to the question of resources, I think, local knowledge, and you all know this, local knowledge of what people are contending with, whether it's health issues from being downwind from a polluting project, or whether it is that knowledge about the groundwater and those community resources that we're all trying to protect is so essential to this, because you won't find those in most of the environmental impact statements and those kinds of things. You won't really find those local stories and knowledge.
I was just putting in the chat, I'm like, that is so beautiful. I love when we and us as leaders, or as movement people, honestly, just EJ movement people in general, that when we gather together and we just share culture and we just share the environment and just, I don't know, love on it, honestly, and love on each other, that I always love. And love and commit when we do that. It's important and definitely a necessity. So I wanted to move, I am enjoying this conversation of how we are keeping the community involved. Let's say that these communities don't know about these issues and are seeking a way to, bring up these issues into their communities and are wanting to get involved into environmental justice and, bringing awareness to these issues. What are ways that they can do that? How are y'all spreading that through, getting people involved? I'm sorry, that was a lot. So I will repeat it if you need me to.
No, thank you. I think I understand. For our organization, Protect Our Water Heritage Rights Coalition, I think, first of all, I think it starts with us. So we've had this very strong focus on stopping this one project, but we also, have learned over the years how these effects cascade downstream and affect all of us, right? So some of it starts with us showing up in that way for other communities too. So that's how you build relationships. If all of the gas being shipped on MVP ultimately ends up downstream somewhere, or backfills that system so that more gas is shipped downstream somewhere to a community that is already overburdened with LNG processing or petrochemical processing, or whatever issue it is that community is contending with. I personally believe, and I know a lot of folks in our coalition, believe this or have learned this over the years, that you also have to show up in real ways for the things that are harming those communities. So that means reaching across coalitions. It could mean just attending an event and speaking on what's happening to MVP and where those intersections are, so that we can see each other and build those relationships, because it really does take all of us. I know that's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but it really does take all of us, and there are more of us than the media or the politicians or the powerful would have folks believe, and more in common, certainly, as we've talked about. So I don't know if that got to the root of your question, but I think that is, it's not just kind of like an entry point in terms of how do we enlist more help, but also it is handing off capacity or handing off support wherever we can, and lifting up other movements too is a big piece.
Yeah, I would say you answered the question perfectly. Thank you.
The growth is often decentralized, and it is also impactful And so, well, not impactful. That's not the word I'm looking for. But it's decentralized, and it not only does it expand out, but growth also touches inward, if you will. So it's an internal change as well as an outward reach. I guess that's what I was trying to say. Let me ask you, what advice do you have for any of our listeners that may want to organize with their communities around any issue? In particular, though, your issue or the issue of fossil fuel expansion, but yet and still they don't really know where to start. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, is that not the challenge, right, with any issue in any community, especially since y'all know who are most moved to take up these things? Working people, people with families, people with young children, people who are already dealing with a lot, right? And so I think what I have heard most consistently over the last several years is that people were more or less just waiting for someone to ask. They were concerned about an issue. They were, maybe felt moved to try to do more, but didn't know where to start. So even conversations like this one that we're having right here is a good starting point, because once people, get a little bit better understanding of what the big issues are, where they can plug in, whether it's attending a hearing or participating in public comment and some of those kinds of activities, then they get a little bit more confident, they get a little bit more understanding of what's needed next. And I think that, from that builds up a community, however small, of 2 or 3 people sometimes is enough to say, well, why don't we call a meeting? Why don't we start phone banking to our neighbors to say, hey, there's this hearing coming up. They want to put a massive incinerator project at, next to so-and-so's farm or down the road from an elementary school or something like that. Let's start calling parents in the area and see if they're concerned about this. Oftentimes it's just that initial ask. And it isn't always the people who get involved and stay involved that are doing the asking. They're waiting, sort of for that invitation and maybe a little bit nervous about where to begin. So, and again, this has kind of come up throughout our conversation today, but if you can bring food to your event, if you can make it, a community gathering, community picnic in that real sense, that to me seems to keep things going and keep people fed and healthy and strong for whatever's coming next.
All right, Mr. Russell, we're making it towards the end of this episode. But before we let you go, I want to ask you one last question that we ask all of our guests. So we know that this work is draining. We're also in it, so we know just how overwhelmed and how just to the max, to the capacity that we can get to. So tell us, what gives you hope? What brings you hope throughout this journey, throughout your journey?
Wow. Thank you for that question. And sometimes I feel like it changes from day to day, but overall, I really do believe that as long and as exhausting as this struggle has been, the community building this resistance has only gotten stronger. And ultimately, that is a gift that, however this particular struggle ends, there will always be the next one. And that is a gift that will, I think, sustain us as we try to solve problems beyond just environmental justice issues or climate justice issues, because especially on climate, it can feel terrifying. It can feel demoralizing to see what's happening and to see very little actually coming from the most powerful decision makers in the way of solutions. But regular people know those solutions exist, whether they are spending time on building up mutual aid efforts, or they are spending time installing a community garden or something along those lines. Those are real tangible things that we take with us from every fight that aren't going to go away, and that no, powerful entity is ever going to be able to crush. That's the kind of thread that weaves through our movements that gives me hope, and really ultimately keeps me going every day. That the people in this movement are beautiful. Sometimes we argue, sometimes we disagree, but the goal is the same, and that sense of community is very real and very strong.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.